This is Straight Talk with Roger Hunt Unscripted. I am your host. Alzheimer's is a type of dementia that causes problems with memory, thinking, and behavior. Symptoms usually develop slowly and get worse over time, becoming severe enough to interfere with daily tasks. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia, a general term for memory loss and other intellectual abilities serious enough to interfere with daily life. Alzheimer's disease accounts for 60 to 80% of dementia cases. Please help me welcome this evening, Straight Talk with Roger Hunt, Unscripted. Ladies, we have with me Leslie Gregory. She's the CEO, President of Alzheimer's Association of the Georgia chapter. Jenny Helms, Vice President of Public Policy and Programs. Dr. Monica Parker, Assistant Professor of Medicine in the Division of Geriatrics and Gerontology at Emory University. Did I do that right, Doctor?
Neurology.
Neurology? What did I say?
Geriatrics.
Geriatrics? Oh, okay. Well, we'll get it right. That's all good. Georgia 2014 statistics accounts for 130,000 persons with Alzheimer's and related dementia. Another 325,000 caregivers, which totals 450,000, which are affected by this terrible disease. Overall, more than 5 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's today. Welcome to the show, ladies. Well, I have the pleasure of 3 beautiful women with me. Boy, I can't ask for anything better than that. And Dr. Parker, we're going to start with you, and you know what? I'm going to make sure I do this right. Dr. Parker.
Mm-hmm.
Leslie Gregory.
Jenny
Helms. Okay. If I get it twisted here, we're just going to keep on rolling. I remember Dr. Jenny Leslie. Okay.
I got it.
Well, Leslie, we're going to start with you since
Sure.
you're in the hot seat. You got you in the hot seat over here. Tell our viewers, first of all, what is Alzheimer's, and and what effects does it really have on people?
Okay. As you mentioned earlier, it is the single most common type of dementia. And I get this question a lot, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's?
Mm-hmm.
And the way we like to describe it is that dementia is an umbrella, and underneath are the various types. And
Okay.
Alzheimer's is the single most commonly diagnosed type. And it is a progressive disease of the brain that destroys brain cells, and it affects memory, reasoning, thinking, behavior. It's anything but normal memory loss. That's not what Alzheimer's disease is.
Okay. And Dr. Parker, over in what you do in the neurology, is there any relation with, I guess with all the stem cell research, talking about stem cell, if you can talk about that a little bit.
Well, we're not really talking about stem cells. What we're doing in research, certainly here at Emory, is trying to find those things that predispose us to the development of Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to find and diagnose Alzheimer's before symptoms actually set in. So that's the big focus on where research is. So research decades ago concentrated on trying to find a medicine to treat the symptoms. None of the medications we currently have available treat the disease at all. So research now is focusing on, okay, what is the prodrome? What are the things that what things in an individual may make that person more susceptible to developing dementia later on. So research now is focusing on early detection, methods of looking at somebody like you or me or any of us sitting here. It's like, okay, do you have a positive family history? So that's something to make you think that somebody later on in life will develop it. But it's sort of like we know about genetics, but now we're looking at cerebrospinal fluid. So for those of us sitting here, how can we predict risk? We're trying to learn more about what are the predictive risk factors for the onset of Alzheimer's type dementia. And as Leslie said, this is not a normal part of aging.
Right.
You know, people say, well, they're senile, that's all part of aging. Developing dementia is not a normal phenomenon. That's not normal with aging.
So you mentioned symptoms early on in your statement. What are some of the common symptoms, if there are any such thing as common symptoms for this terrible?
Well, I think most people, because my job is primary care and clinical medicine, most people think memory loss is one of the earlier signs, but there are other signs that go along with it. There is memory loss, yes. 2 years before some people are diagnosed with dementia, they may have trouble with their gait and their balance. Remember, this is a brain disorder. Your brain helps you coordinate your mobility. As Leslie talked about a little bit earlier, other signs and symptoms are problems in areas of judgment, loss of word finding, loss of language, loss of what we call executive function, a previously learned behavior, like I'm a great cake baker, and then all of a sudden I can't bake a cake. I can't bake it from scratch. I can't follow a recipe. So that's a loss of executive function. I got keys to the car, and I know the keys belong in the car, but I don't really know what to do to make the keys in the car go together such that it makes sense. So we call that loss of executive function.
And I think one thing we're seeing at the association too is a typical early symptom we're seeing more and more is people not being able to manage their finances. They might miss some bills entirely. They might pay others multiple times in a month. And that makes them very vulnerable to exploitation.
You mentioned also the hereditary. So looking at someone in my family, for example, I'm just going to use me as an example. There's some history of heart disease and diabetes, and does any of these elements, looking at family history, medicines, and medical conditions, with that, you all, your study, your research, look at some of those conditions in your family history and traits?
Actually, in African Americans, we have a gene called the ABCA7 gene. We talk about ApoE4 genes associated with Alzheimer's. Well, in African Americans, having the ABCA7 gene is more predictive of onset of dementia than having ApoE4. And the ABCA7 gene is a gene that turns on the Alzheimer's cascade in the presence of poorly controlled hypertension, diabetes, and cholesterol. So some of the cardiovascular risk factors that you talked about do have an etiologic role in the onset of dementia. As Leslie said, Alzheimer's is one type of dementia. The most common type of dementia, second most common type of dementia, is vascular dementia. And that's the dementia that's associated with those cardiovascular risk factors. Poor brain blood flow related to cardiovascular disease like hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, and atherosclerosis.
And I guess I'm wondering, because sometimes, if the most healthiest person can end up developing, I guess, down the road, because you often hear, well, they were in great shape, or they worked out, and then all of a sudden they develop these different forms, like say dementia, memory loss. What types of programs, I guess I turn to you, what types of programs are you currently working on to kind of help, to bring awareness to the situation?
Well, one of them is a program called Healthy Habits. And with that, we've recognized that we really do need to work on developing healthy habits as early as we can in our lives. And so that means eating a Mediterranean diet, which is rich in vegetables and less meats and less fats. And it also means exercising, and that could just be brisk walks, and also socialization, getting out dancing, also exercising the brain. And what we're finding now is that researchers are really banking on either trying to delay the onset or preventing it. And so if people really embrace this type of lifestyle early, they can really decrease the risk. And when you think about it, so many of those things like eating habits contribute to hypertension and to cholesterol, high cholesterol, and those things are things that affect the vascular system, which really put people at risk. So there is stuff that we can do, and we do have those programs. And also, our website has tons of information about Alzheimer's and the latest research.
And we'll definitely be sharing it at the end of the program. And I'm going to jump back and forth here. You mentioned vascular, and you mentioned heredity. We talked about heretics. Let's see where I'm going to go with this. And Rob, you can take care of this once we're in the editing room. This happens all the time. He told me I can't stop, so I just got to keep rolling. I trained because I was listening to what you were saying with the eating habits and everything, and then it kind of wanted to lead me back to the vascular system.
Well, let's talk about risk factors for Alzheimer's. Okay, your main risk factors for Alzheimer's are genetic. We can't do anything about that. But also age. More than 50% of those persons over the age of 85 have some type of dementia or dementing symptom that's present. We can't alter that. But the things that Ms. Ginny talked about, we can. And those are the things in middle age that affect the onset of dementia later on. So poorly controlled hypertension, obesity, diabetes in midlife is predictive of dementia later on in life. So those are the things that we can adjust. Another thing that I might add here is, you know, we talk about smoking. I'm going to throw alcoholism in here a little bit because that's a problem. You see a lot of press with respect to football players, head trauma, early head trauma. Football players are one way of thinking about head trauma, but you know, people who had some kind of concussive event early on in midlife is a risk factor
So
for
boxing,
onset of dementia.
and I guess when you mentioned football, the boxing, those athletics,
right, any
boxing
kind of contact
and
sport.
baseball, you
Yeah.
have those type of in wrestling, the violence, I call it violence, but you know, you see it's very physical contact, and
Yeah,
I think about
contact
the brain
sports,
being, you know, affected by the punches and the hits and the falling on the ground, because some of these surfaces are not as soft as they appear, but still yet it affects, you know, not maybe immediately effects, but long-term effects. You know, I look at some athletes like Muhammad Ali, you know, that's been affected. I know he has a different disease though, but
Well,
still.
And that Parkinson's syndrome is something that is also trauma-induced, can be.
Right, and I guess with some of the symptoms, that's where I wanted to go. I guess diagnosing various symptoms that may relate to other diseases, but have a correlation to Alzheimer's and dementia.
And that's why people should have a very good relationship with their primary care doctor.
Mhm.
You know, because of the Affordable Care Act that was instituted in 2010, and the National Alzheimer's Prevention Act, we now as primary care doctors are incentivized to screen for dementing disorders during the annual wellness visit. So as part of your annual wellness visit, a well-informed and well-trained primary care doctor can do a screen in his or her office, and if there's something abnormal, look for why that might be. So there are lots of things that can give you symptoms of dementia, but if you have poorly controlled diabetes, if you have a B12 or vitamin D deficiency, or more importantly, thyroid dysfunction, those are things that can contribute to brain dysfunction. So your job is to get to your primary care doctor and make sure that all things physiologic are where they're supposed to be. So just because it looks and walks like a duck doesn't mean it's a duck. It could be a swan. So you have to manage the medical issues first. And that's why it's important to go to your primary care doctor to make sure that all metabolic things are where they're supposed to be. And if I've eliminated the B12 deficiency or the thyroid disease or the poorly controlled diabetes or hypertension, and if you have a significant accumulation of those A, beta, and tau proteins, independent of anything else, that is predictive of Alzheimer's disease.
So
Everybody doesn't do that though.
So as far as treatment, and I know this may be, you know, out there, you know, are there any specific treatments and you know, that you all are looking at to actually attack this right now?
Well, there are a number of trials that are going on to determine a treatment. None of the current medications that are used to treat people with dementing disorders is curative. It's not like a chemotherapy drug for Alzheimer's. All the drugs we use right now are used to treat the symptoms. None of them is curative. There is no medication, nothing you can buy on QVC or anything else that's going to cure Alzheimer's. And I have to get that out there because there are a lot of people that sell things.
Okay.
And they say this is going to work, but there is no cure for Alzheimer's disease anywhere in the United States or any place in the world.
So with the 455,000, anyone, you can chime in at any time, ladies. The 455,000, I guess in the Georgia area, that's almost the population of the state of Georgia, I mean, the city of Atlanta anyway, and then the 5 million Americans. And I've had family members that's been affected by it. So my grandfather, he lived to be 100, but it actually hit him probably around the age of 90, 95. He had never been sick in his life until right around 90, he started developing memory loss and things that you mentioned. But at the same time, for a caregiver, and I'm going to turn to focus to the caregivers for a moment, because I know sometimes it's difficult as it is in watching my grandfather go and my aunt take care of my grandfather. Sometimes the frustration, or a loved one going to that person and they not remembering who you are and what's your name, let alone what day it is. What's being done, I guess, for the caregiver? And I'm going to jump back and forth, because sometimes the concern, so taking care of a loved one or a family member, it can be real difficult and challenging. programs for caregivers and then help for caregivers. What do you all have?
I think the most important thing that I can tell you about caregivers, and I say this from a clinician standpoint, is you need to educate yourself.
Mhm.
And you need
Okay.
to arm yourself with an education and understanding of what disease you're actually dealing with.
Okay.
The Alzheimer's Association certainly offers caregiving classes, but there, if you live in South Georgia, you can go to the Rosalind Carter Institute, they have classes, but even more locally, the AARP also offers caregiving education classes. So if you are a caregiver, you have a family that needs to care for somebody with dementia, you need to educate yourself
Okay.
about what's to be expected, what are the phases of the disease, what kinds of behaviors can you expect or not expect. You need to develop your own network, but more importantly, you as a caregiver need to be educated, first of all, about the disease process. You need to be educated about what resources are available for you, and you need to help your family to become educated about the disease process, and more importantly, you need to invite them to assist you with caring for that person. And if you're the grandchild that visits periodically, you can help the caregiver, you can relieve them.
And I can give you a very personal example of one of our services. My mother-in-law was diagnosed recently, and the day after we got the diagnosis, I called my husband and I said, we have an appointment with one of our care consultants. You're coming into the office today. And he walked in this office feeling overwhelmed. He's a fix-it kind of person, wants to make everything right. He felt helpless, like he didn't know what to do. But he left this office with a care plan. And it said, we need to look at her finances, we need to look at driving, we need to look at this, this, and this. So he walked out knowing exactly what he and his brothers needed to do. And that's something that the Alzheimer's Association provides. And then his brothers have also taken advantage of our services in another state. They've taken some of those classes that Dr. Parker mentioned, so they know how to communicate better with their mother. They all took a class on how to do the financial and legal planning for their mom. They've just availed themselves to this wide array of services that we have, and it's empowered them. They don't feel as helpless as they did when they walked out of the doctor's office with the diagnosis.
And the other thing that I think is really helpful is we now have programs for people that are newly diagnosed. And as you can imagine, if you were diagnosed with Alzheimer's, your world would be turned upside down. And we're here to help the person who is diagnosed figure out how they can have purpose and meaning and a quality life after a diagnosis. And one of the things that people newly diagnosed tell us is that exercise does as much for them as they think their medications do. But also being with other people where they can discuss what it's like. People newly diagnosed will tell us that their family members mean well, but they step in and they take over everything. And that's very upsetting to a person newly diagnosed. And we can address the different issues and help them figure out one-on-one how to make their lives work. And for some people, like when they're newly diagnosed, it's safe for them to drive. And so we can help have the conversations about what to do, what to look out for, and then when it does come time to cease driving, what's the plan for getting the person where they want to go. And also through support groups, they can be with other people in the same boat. And so they can discuss things and say, well, my wife won't let me go to Florida to see my son. And then others will chime in and say, okay, so how can we get you to Florida? If you can't drive, what can we do? And together they can brainstorm and come up, well, ride down with your other son and different things like that. And then with one-on-one counseling, we can help the individual and the families come up with ideas of how to make things work best.
Because I'm assuming that the loss of control of functions that you once had control of, and then like I say, now the family members come in, they've taken over. I can no longer drive myself. I can no longer go around, even go down to the corner store or market, to take care of basic necessities, and feeling a self of helplessness.
Right.
Do you often get that? I guess.
Well, I think that a lot of people who are starting to have problems are aware of some changes, and so they try to compensate for them. But as Jenny said, the worst thing you can do with somebody who's aware of change is just assume that it's your job to take over, because that is something that is depressing, first of all, because you're affecting their own autonomy. Most people pride themselves on being able to take care of themselves. And when you take their ability to manage themselves away, you kind of depress their spirit a bit.
Mhm.
And, you know, depression itself is one of those symptoms that can masquerade as dementia, and you can worsen their outcomes.
So even with, you know, I know you mentioned the age of 80, is there earlier age that it can be detected, or is there a specific age, the average age, I guess, of what is the average age of a person that's been diagnosed with
I
dementia?
think that's highly variable.
Mhm.
Early onset dementia, early onset Alzheimer's takes place before the age of 50.
Okay.
Usually we have people that are in their 30s and their 40s who have Alzheimer's. Most people who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's are generally coming in the 7th decades.
Mhm.
But if you suffer from vascular dementia, it can be anywhere in that before 50.
Wow.
But younger onset is pretty rare still,
Okay.
fortunately. And I do think that, I think we'll start to see better management of conditions, and hopefully we'll see the average age push off. But right now, we estimate that about 10% of people age 65 have it, and that number doubles every decade.
So since there's no curable cure for this disease, is there anything foreseeable that you all see in your research or studies with?
Well, that's it. Everybody needs to participate.
Okay.
You know, if you are of an age, I know here at the Emory Alzheimer's Disease Research Center is a resource for people.
Okay.
It's a resource for understanding brain disorders, but it's also your point of contact for getting involved in clinical research studies where we're evaluating different diagnostic techniques, different therapeutic interventions for the disease, but, you know, participate in a trial, and which brings us to Trial Match. You know, the Alzheimer's Association runs Trial Match, where you can go in there and put in your particulars and learn about what you're interested in and find studies that may be appropriate for you to participate in. And it's especially important for women and for people of color to participate in research. Why? Because the diagnostic techniques, the medications or therapeutics that are developed may not be specific for you. Most of the drugs we're using to treat the disease now were developed for European white men, not even European women. So if we want a drug that is more disease specific for different groups of people, we need to understand how the disease manifests and presents in different groups of people. The overall symptoms may be the same, but the mechanism by which they get there may be different in different people and different genders.
So speaking of which, then, a person that is diagnosed, depending on the age, and has there ever been research done on the life expectancy? So once I'm diagnosed with this, is there a lifespan in which?
It's usually 10 years from diagnosis to death.
Wow. Wow.
But the good news is that worldwide, there's a big emphasis on research. And worldwide, the biggest hope right now is truly on prevention and healthy lifestyles. And our association, the Alzheimer's Association, is very dedicated to finding a cure, prevention of it, and works very hard to both lobby Congress for funding for research through the National Institute of Health, for funding research, for promoting the clinical trial. So I feel like that we are moving in the right direction. We just need the society in general to recognize that brain health is a huge concern and a public health epidemic, and that it's going to take all of us moving forward and addressing this, both through healthy lifestyles, but also in promoting research and being part of that.
And that's very true. The only way this disease is ever going to go away is through research.
Mhm.
And we need funding, we need much more funding, and we need people. We need people in those trials.
And one of the things, and I'm going to throw this out there too, you hear people talk when people start dementia and Alzheimer's and some of the other ailments that pop up. Sometimes people say it's associated with the food in which we eat because of our food has been so contaminated with the pesticides. And I don't know if you guys in your research and development study have you.
I think that there
made
are
any of that?
some studies that are going on looking at that sort of thing, but I don't think that there's anything conclusive.
Okay.
I think one of the myths that I've heard is that if you drink things out of aluminum puts you at risk for Alzheimer's. There's no evidence to support that. So, you know, there's no evidence whatsoever to support that. So I think that consistent with the idea of more healthful lifestyle, is healthful diet, which is more heavy into the vegetables and the legumes and the non-red meat proteins. You know, we need to consume more of that. But is there some contaminant that does this, that does that? No. And I would direct anybody who's really interested to, it's old, but it's really pretty concrete. Be educated.
Okay.
The 2010 consensus statement on Alzheimer's
And
talks
so-
about those food myths.
So you all do a lot of educational seminars, and again, we want our viewers to know that it's not just in Georgia, but the National Alzheimer's Association, in your prospective state, your charter and everything, there's programs in those various states where they can also get help and reach out as well. You got your national website out there. So if you're watching the program, we want our viewers to know that you can get help, and don't just, you don't have to be in the Atlanta, Georgia area to get help, but just kind of reach out.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not you or your family member affected, but you know someone that's affecting you because you're a friend or loved one, get them some help. They may not want to reach out. Some people, I guess sometimes the pride gets in the way as well.
You're right.
So they have to be you may have to be the one to reach out on their behalf because they just,
A recent study showed that 1 in 7 persons over the age of 60 were concerned about their memory loss and had significant concerns. And yet, 80% of them had not seen a physician. And so they're telling their friend, their family member, a coworker. And so our message is early detection matters. And see, the changes in the brain that occur even before the symptoms are significant, like changes in judgment, which could affect the ability to manage your money, and you might be giving it away, or affect your driving. And so we want to see people get an early diagnosis, and so we need people, if you see something, say something.
it's out of the abnormal.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm saying people, you don't want the people to take offense to it because you may point something out that they may not be aware. And again, they may not know. But go ahead, Leslie.
Jenny has an excellent point about getting that early diagnosis. Sometimes I have people say to me, well, you just told me there's no cure. I don't want to know if I have it. And what I tell them is, if you get the diagnosis, you are now empowered. Because there will come a time when you can't make the decisions about your care, about your finances, about the things that are important to you. If you get the diagnosis, you can make those decisions now, make those decisions known. It is empowering. And also the medications that we do have tend to work better when started earlier in the course of the disease. So that early diagnosis is critical.
And not knowing is very dangerous. Because it could be very dangerous, so not knowing.
In a lot of ways, yes.
And it's not just for the Alzheimer's, but it's for a lot of other diseases out there. People say, I'd rather not know, just let me go ahead and die. But no, it really...
They don't want to die.
Right, they really don't, but at the same time, is not knowing this can be very dangerous and critical. But not only for you, but for someone, again, your loved ones and those who really do care about you, so we can do the right thing. Like you say, early detection is very key and important. If someone wants to contribute to the Alzheimer's Association, again, you need funding, you need help. What is it that they can do to contribute to?
Anyone anywhere can go to www.alz.org and donate. Here in Georgia, we have some events that are very important to us, very special to us. We have our walks in the fall. We have them 16 all across the state. Anywhere in the state you can find a walk. In the spring, we have an event called Dancing Stars, and it is very much like